Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stepping Up Transition, a framework to instruct educators on building compliant and quality transition plans. My name is Dr. Mallory Deerdorf. I am the Assistant Director of the Zero Center for Learning Enrichment and an Assistant Research Professor for the University of Oklahoma. Please bear with me as I record today. I have a young child who is very upset about doing virtual learning amidst the snow that we have here in Oklahoma, and I also have two dogs that might bark. I created the Stepping Up Transition framework when I was in my doctoral studies at the University of Oklahoma. And I just saw a really big need in creating some type of graphic representation of what transition planning would look like, and also being able to follow how to weave in transition assessments. My background was coming from an elementary classroom, and so transition planning was not something that I did a lot of until recently. And so a lot of the terms and a lot of the vocabulary really were hard for me to understand. And so things really got mixed up. And so the Stepping Up Transition framework really tries to visually guide teachers through the transition planning process. And I will show the graphic and explain a little bit more about why I came to creating this framework. In all of our trainings that we provide at the Zero Center, we always ask this question: what is the purpose of special education as defined by IDEA 2004? Since we're not in person and I can't take answers from the audience, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about what you believe is the purpose of special education as defined by IDEA. I believe you might have come to the conclusion of FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. And that is true. And it goes on to say to emphasize special education and related services designed to meet a student's unique needs. But one part that you might not have remembered is it says, and to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So this puts transition at the forefront of the purpose of special education, emphasizing the importance of preparing students for their lives outside of high school through transition planning within the IEP. Even though the purpose of special education emphasizes the importance of transition, a large majority of special education teachers leave their pre-service teacher preparation programs without adequate knowledge of transition planning. So when they looked at teacher preparation programs across the United States, they found that only 35% of these programs required a dedicated course to transition. That leaves a large majority of teachers, 65%, who leave their undergraduate preparation programs without a course dedicated to transition. On top of that, Anderson and Morningstar et al., 15 years apart, 2003, 2018, found that many special education teachers leave their undergraduate preparation programs with little to no transition education embedded into other special education coursework. This indicates a pretty grave problem, that there is a lack of teacher education in transition, meaning many teachers may not know how to adequately write, create, implement transition plans for students to help them address that first purpose of special education, which is to prepare students with disabilities for further education, employment, and independent living. And sadly, a poorly written and non-compliant transition plan may be a violation of a student's free, appropriate public education. And the reality of creating a poorly written and non-compliant transition plan increases since many of our teachers don't have the information from their undergraduate teacher programs to help them in creating these quality and compliant transition plans. And the reason it's so important to write quality and compliant transition plans is that it also provides an avenue for students to have appropriate transition services, which then lead to better post-school outcomes for students. So it all starts with creating these plans that meet Indicator 13 compliance, but also acknowledge best practices when creating them. And if we start there, then we can help students to obtain better post-school outcomes. So when looking through the literature and looking at the current state of transition plans, many transition plans do not meet basic quality and compliance standards across the United States. So here are three of the most commonly found violations. Plans were more likely to include post-secondary goals for employment than other areas, including post-secondary education and independent living. Many plans lacked the inclusion of annual IEP goals that were related to transition, and many plans lacked the inclusion of transition services. All three of those areas are mandated through IDEA. So while there's not a lot that I can do to change undergraduate teaching preparation programs, there is something that can help educators in creating these compliant and quality transition plans through in-service training. And research also supports this. The Stepping Up framework was created in order to help teachers build compliant and quality transition plans. This framework is built off a couple of different things. First, it's built off of best practices in delivering professional development to adults. It's based off of best practices in writing transition plan components as well as IDEA mandates. It also includes behavior analytic instructional techniques, case law recommendations, and it uses the Indicator 13 checklist to provide a basic compliance standard. So here's the Stepping Up transition graphic to represent the framework, and I'm going to go through each step of the stair step to talk about how I would instruct it to other teachers and how I have instructed it to other teachers in a very brief way, since I only have a couple of minutes today to explain it. Okay, so let's get started going through the framework. So the first step is to provide transition interest inventories and exploration to students with disabilities. As you see, the next step is to build post-secondary goals. So using these interest inventories and exploration, we can build evidence to support students selecting their own post-secondary goals, which not only meets compliance standards, but it also helps meet quality standards. When I first started out creating transition plans, there were a couple of terms that really boggled my mind. Post-secondary goals, annual transition goals, and transition services, which are on this graphic as coordinated activities. I had so much trouble deciding what was different about them and which transition assessment should lead me to them. So that's how this graphic came about. Here are a couple of ideas. Here's some career interest inventories. We have the careers clusters, OK Career Guide, the PICS, My Next Move, or ONET, depending on which terminology that you might use. Some exploration avenues include ONET, Career One Stop, and using results from career clusters or Holland's Code. Sometimes they have links that students can use to go then explore those options. This can help provide students with an idea of how their interests and preferences align with jobs. It can guide post-secondary education goals, and it helps students to have informed ideas on how to create their post-secondary goals. This also provides educators with the evidence to show that post-secondary goals were based upon age-appropriate transition assessments. During the Stepping Up trainings, I go through several options of career clusters, ONET, some different interest inventories that teachers can use and where to find them, and then I also guide them through the process of exploration. The results that are provided from these career assessments, these career interest assessments, I show the different parts in it so that they can know what to take out, put into the transition plan, and how to guide that creation for the next step. So then the next step is providing this information to students to help them select their post-secondary goals. I've alluded to that previously, but this is the step that you would then create or help students create those goals for themselves. During the Stepping Up trainings, I provide a list of a variety of post-secondary ideas for independent living, post-secondary education, for employment, and community participation. I also provide some guidance on how to create these post-secondary goals, and it should answer these three questions. Where do you want to live, learn, and work after high school? That helps meet compliance standards of creating goals that occur after high school, and hopefully by using the evidence provided in those age-appropriate transition assessments, we can help students create appropriate post-secondary goals. After we've determined or helped the student determine what their post-secondary goals are, then we can decide which transition assessments might help us decide which skills the students need to work on in order of importance. Where is their need at? So I lead them through the next step, which is deciding which transition skills assessments to use. In the trainings, I would provide a variety of different transition skills assessments and show them a variety of results that it can produce, so that that process is individualized. The process of choosing transition assessments is individualized. Here are a couple of examples of transition skill assessments that I might show to educators, but then I might change it up depending on the needs of the students. So if I were teaching teachers who taught students with more significant disabilities, I might change this list up. Or who teach students who are younger, I also might change the list up. But here are some main ones that I might cover: the TAG or Transition Assessment and Goal Generator, the Employability Life Skills Assessment, the Life Skills Inventory, the AIR Self-Determination Scale, or any of the other self-determination assessments that are out there, or the ESTER, S or 3. It really just depends on the population that the teachers serve. If it's a variety of settings, then I might just provide a variety of transition skills assessments and note on each one what population that assessment might be best for. Those transition skills assessments yield results to help educators build annual transition goals. Those skills assessments identify needs, and that's how we can identify which annual transition goals that the students should work towards. Those annual transition goals will then also help students in obtaining their post-secondary goals. In the Stepping Up trainings, I would provide several different results from different transition assessments and then show how you can build an annual transition goal out of those results. But I also note that there should be at least one annual transition goal for every post-secondary goal. And I explain the differences between annual transition goals and post-secondary goals. Annual transition goals are just like academic annual goals. They need to have a condition, a behavior, or a criterion. Sometimes that's referred to as SMART goals. Using this formula below, the condition, behavior, and criterion goal format, we can make sure that goals are compliant. This also provides the availability for these goals to be progress monitored on and tracked, so that students are making adequate and meaningful progress in transition skills yearly. The last step is identifying coordinated activities or transition services that will help students to meet their post-secondary goals. They can also help them meet annual transition goals as well. During the training, I explain the difference between coordinated activities, or also known as transition services, and how they might be different from annual goals and post-secondary goals. Coordinated activities are learning opportunities that help students meet their post-secondary goals. They can be services or activities or lessons or courses, but then I provide this link to coordinated set of activities, online resource, to help teachers brainstorm some ideas that might help their students in obtaining their post-secondary goals. The Stepping Up framework and graphic also show the alignment between goals and services, how everything builds off of the post-secondary goal. Then it creates annual transition goals and coordinated activities, and it really shows and illuminates that alignment, which is seen in IDEA and through the Indicator 13 or the Indicator 13 checklist. Overall, the entire training for Stepping Up Transition takes about 4 hours. This can be lengthened depending on the circumstances, but we have shown results of being effective with just 3.5 to 4 hours of training, and I will explain that in the next slide. I conducted a study to determine the effectiveness of the Stepping Up Transition framework with educators. The research design was a pre-post test with an intervention and comparison group. We conducted a study in connection with our State Department of Education, And we held two different trainings. We held the Stepping Up Transition training, and then we held a comparison group training. The comparison group training received a training on just transition assessments, and the intervention group received the training on the Stepping Up Transition framework. Overall, there were 134 participants who took part. Majority were female, white, and non-Hispanic. The largest percentage of teachers taught in a high school setting, in a resource classroom, in rural environments, and had taught for at least 15 years. I was unable to obtain actual transition plan documents within the IEP, so I settled for the next best thing, which was a transition planning assessment, which included 7 multiple choice questions, 4 discrimination questions, and 4 fill-in-the-blank questions. The 4 fill-in-the-blank questions asked teachers to cold write an annual transition goal with a prompt, an annual transition goal without a prompt, a post-secondary goal, and a transition service or coordinated activity. All of the questions were created based upon existing literature and research, and it went through several iterations with a vetting process. When grading the fill-in-the-blank responses, I had an inter-observer agreement of 91.8% of 64% of the total responses. The main research question was, do participants in the Stepping Up intervention exhibit significantly greater gains from pre to post transition plan assessment in total, multiple choice, discrimination, and fill-in-the-blank scores than those in the comparison group? This picture represents the scores from pre to post with the intervention and comparison group. The intervention is in red and the comparison group is blue. For the different types of scores are labeled as well, for the fill-in-the-blank, discrimination, and multiple choice. So you can see how the scores changed over time and how they changed between the intervention and comparison group pre to post. As you can see, the biggest amount of change was in the fill-in-the-blank questions, but it also was big enough to be significant in the discrimination as well. So both the fill-in-the-blank and discrimination questions were statistically significant from pre to post on time and intervention group. If you're interested in p-values and effect size, here is the actual data that was produced from the study. And like I said, you can see that discrimination and fill-in-the-blank were statistically significant, as well as the total score. The fill-in-the-blank questions actually had a large effect size as well. Therefore, the Stepping Up intervention statistically significantly increased educator knowledge in transition and skills to write compliant transition plan components. Because the biggest amount of change was in the fill-in-the-blank, that actually mimics more closely the actual process that teachers are writing transition plans. So special educators receiving the intervention saw an increased ability to create compliant post-secondary goals, annual transition goals, and coordinated activities. This indicates that high-quality professional development training can yield increases in educator knowledge and skills in as little of time as 3.5 hours. If you want more information, you can use the QR code below to scan, and you can check out references, contact information, and a link for the full dissertation. For future research, we would like to use the model in graduate coursework, which we are doing right now, so that data will be upcoming. We would also like to use a train the trainer model and utilize actual transition plans for data analysis. If you'd like more information or if you have questions or comments, please contact me through my email address, mallory.deerdorf@ou.edu. Thank you for attending my session, and I hope you have a wonderful conference and a great rest of your school year.